deeds, and we have a memo from our governance manager, Hannah, on page 49.
Good afternoon, councillors. I think the report itself is quite a simple one, so I don't intend to speak to it very long, but just to note that in the recommendation there's a series of bullet points. I'd like to remove Manawatu Wanganui Regional Disaster Relief Fund Trust from the list because it's actually administered by Horizons, not ourselves. Context for the report, obviously already set out in the report. There have been changes to the Trusts Act, so it would certainly be prudent to do a review of this nature from the perspective of compliance. And regardless, it seems timely that we do a more regular review. And you'll also, maybe some of you will also remember that in the statement of expectation for the Regent for the 2020-23 statement of expectation, there was a note there that elected members were hoping to see a review, particularly of the Regent's trust deed, so that's in line with our direction anyway. And the recommendations that are coming from committee today, there are also recommendations from the Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee with regard to Keisha Birch, so if they were to pass today, obviously the nature of the Keisha Birch trust deed would need to be reviewed. Because the deed as it stands sets out the purpose of the Keisha Birch Trust Board being to be a CCO. So that would need to be reviewed to determine whether that trust was wound up or whether the purpose needed to be altered. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Good, we've got a couple. I'll start. So is this going to be, and I note this is not mandatory, this is an officer advice. It's not going to be, because we get lots of pushback at times, especially from the CCOs, because they go under quite a bit of reporting. Is this going to be unwieldy for them, or is this a light touch?
It's intended that it be led by us, and that the boards would be able to communicate with us on anything that they'd like to contribute to, rather than it being led by them. Okay, that probably brings me to the second question. Shouldn't it be collaborative? Shouldn't it be together? Certainly. So the CCOs in particular have already been communicating with them, so they're aware that this report is coming up in there. Okay. All right, I'll open up to the floor. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And you'd asked the first question I had, which was about how the boards have been involved with this already. I suppose the question, maybe to start with, Hannah, is who controls the trust? Who do the trusts belong to? Is that council or is that the trusts, the boards themselves?
Sorry, just to clarify your question, do you mean who does the trustee belong to? Could I ask legal counsel to answer that on my behalf?
It's a good question because it's not entirely clear. With the CCOs, we obviously have a lot of oversight of those. Some of the CCOs have actually indicated that they would like to do this review themselves just because of the nature of the trust deeds. We do have some input in terms of appointing some members, and that's usually our oversight. But who make the decisions? The decision makers are the trustees. So it would need to be with their agreement, bringing them on the journey. That's why they've been consulted on this.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'll probably come back to that. So, Hannah, you said you've talked to the trust boards already.
The CCOs we have.
The CCOs. So then you'll know that Te Manawa have already been through a review process based on this legislative change?
Yes.
So why do they still need to be reviewed again if they've done that work already?
Because the scope is set out that that's only one of the four things we'll be looking at.
Okay. And then on the next steps, so says council be presented with the proposed draft trust deeds, which, if approved by council, would then be sent to the relevant trust board for approval. So I suppose that's looping back on the legal question of what is the status of council approving changes to trust deeds when we don't control those trust deeds?
We're not approving the change to the trust deed. The council would be saying, we think that these are good recommendations for your trust to consider for your deed. The trustees are the ones that will make the decision on their trust deed.
So wouldn't it be maybe equally appropriate or a different way of looking at it for us to do our review and put those thoughts to the trustees, and then the trust do that reporting through their normal reporting to say they wanted to change their trust deed, that's what they had planned to do, rather than us taking what seems to be quite a heavy-handed approach of deciding the changes we would like to see and then putting that to the trust deed? Is there a different way of approaching this that will be more collaborative, is my question.
I think the intention is to be collaborative throughout the journey. I'm not sure the 2 points you made were different. So the reason we're bringing this through the chamber is officers could go ahead and do a review, and we could go and speak with the trusts and say, these are suggestions from legal review that officers think are a good idea. Rather than us doing that, we thought the council might like to have a position on whether you think it's a good idea before it goes to the trust.
But at the moment, we're not being asked to make that decision. We're being asked to review the trust deeds. What happens after that is in the next steps. That's down to officers. It's not the recommendation that that report comes back through this council.
I'm sorry, I think I've got lost in the questioning. Could I ask you to
Councillor, I think
rephrase?
it does come back to us.
Yes, it says that in the next steps, but it doesn't say it in the recommendation. So if we don't agree that it should come back to us, there's no recommendation for that. It's just saying
Well, we
we
can
agree to
change
review.
that.
Okay.
If we can put that in as another step if we need to.
Okay.
That was
Thank you.
the intention to
I
do
mean,
so.
I'm with your line of questioning. I'm with you in the sense that we need to still have some oversight over this.
Absolutely.
That's the purpose in bringing this to the chamber, yes.
Thank
Can I
you.
just, for point of clarification, Mr. Mayor? The process is that even if these come back and then they go to the trusts themselves, if there's any changes to the trust deeds, and they agree or alter them or whatever they would like to do, they still have to come back here to be
Yes.
approved.
Yes, that was my understanding. I suppose my question is, what is the point of a report coming to council when we can agree, disagree, change, but we have no power? That's over to the trust.
Yes, we do have power because we ultimately, the council ultimately approves or not the trust deed. So if the changes are made with the trustees, they would need to come back here for approval.
Okay, I think there's an issue there, but I'll pick it up in comments. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Hannah, for the report. Obviously, paragraph 3, you outlined 4 areas that you'd like to see traversed in the review. I guess want to know what, what assurance we have that it wouldn't expand into a more fundamental nature of review, and or what process might be triggered if it were to look at, the more fundamental things within the deeds.
It's our intention in scoping the work that that's what the legal review would focus on. If other areas were unearthed as a part of that process, it would still come back to the chamber for discussion as to whether it was something that we wanted to pursue or not.
In terms of your conversations so far with CCOs, has there been any interest expressed in going further than the areas outlined here?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. Just looking at some of the smaller community trusts that council administers, some of those trustees are very old, and I think there might even be some difficulty in even finding the trustees, who originally signed the trust deed. So, I mean, what's the process if we run into difficulty about, reviewing? Because, I mean, for example, JC Trust, I know it's a very old trust deed, was signed by the trustees a long time ago. I'm not even sure, if we've got contact details of this trustee.
Yeah, you're right, they are old. I think it's Paul Rieger,
Yeah.
is that. Performing Arts Trust,
Yeah.
Brian Elwood.
Yeah, that would be another one.
They're old, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for some of these smaller trustees, it might be hard to find the original trustees. So what's the plan there? And I guess following on from that, given that they're very small trusts that do very specific things, is it really important that they be reviewed?
I think part of the answer is in your question, councillor, in that it makes it even more timely that we actually bring them up to date while we can. Where we're unable to speak with who we need to, I'll need to get legal advice on what we need to do on that.
Yeah, okay. I'll make a comment, thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, Hannah, the reason we're reviewing all these is because of the Act that came in. So it's not something we've just decided to do.
Correct.
Because that came in at the beginning of the year. So all we're basically making sure is that all of these trusts comply with basically the legal. So we're not doing a review of anything else.
So, yeah, as set out in the report, the catalyst for doing this is absolutely the change to
all
the
these-
Trust Act, ensuring that we're compliant.
Yep. And all these trusts are funded by council, aren't they?
Or administered,
Well,
Or part
or
funded.
has a member of the council on it.
yeah. And excuse me, Councillor Johnson, I was talking to Hannah, not you.
Excuse me, Mr Chair. I think all comments should be directed through the chair, not directly to another member.
Yep. Take note, Mr Chair. So Hannah, so just so that I can, wild-based recovery one, that doesn't have any council funding, does it? It's
My understanding is it's independent, but I'm not an expert in that area. Maybe someone else can
Thank
give
you.
a definitive answer, sorry.
no, that's right, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah, for the report. Just looking at the things that the review would cover, B on the bottom of page 50, I'm just wanting to understand why would we want CCOs, why could we possibly want them to be exempt from the reporting requirements of the LGA?
Through you, Mr Chair. So the LGA allows for exemption. A situation we've been in with several of the CCOs in the recent past is that they've wanted to be exempted, as is allowable under the LGA, but we've not been able to exempt them because their trust deed has not allowed for that.
So what could a possible reason for us wanting them to be exempt, though? What would be the benefit in them not reporting?
So in the recent past, it's been a request from some of the trust boards that the reporting requirements are onerous, particularly in cost.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Councillor, perhaps if I could add to that, I think we've had numerous requests from some of the smaller trusts. We're not talking about the bigger trusts, but some of the smaller ones around the audit cost. For instance, I sit on the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust, and our biggest expense is the audit bill of anything that we do. And we have about 12 transactions. So there's a real need there for some common sense. There's no more questions. Thank you, Hannah. All right, we have the resolution there that Council agree to review the trust deeds around the following trusts: Te Manawa Museums, Regent Theatre, Globe Theatre, Cassia Birch, Palmerston North Performing Arts, Palmerston North Heritage Trust, JC Trust, and the Wild Base Recovery Community Trust. I would like to add another that that Council has presented with any proposed trust deed changes. If we could add that in, please, just to ensure that it does come back via this channel. we'll just get that up on screen. I'm happy to move that. If I could have a seconder. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, Deputy Mayor. Right. I'll just open with some comments. Look, I mean, we do have to do this work. I wasn't aware that we absolutely had to, but because of the Act changing, as long as this is a light overtouch, I am a little bit concerned that our trusts do go through quite a lot of reviews, and I just don't want this to turn into a review. It's got to be a light touch. Some of those older trusts, as Councillor Johnson said, may be difficult to find, but perhaps that's even a reason to do it as well. And some of them do need some slight wording changes around audit, etc. But look, I think it's no harm in perhaps just having a look at it, but as long as I won't go in bigger as Ben here, but as long as it doesn't get overwhelming for the trusts. I'll open it up for comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support this. I don't see this as being a huge issue at all. I certainly think some of these trusts may have, as you've put it, a light touch review, and some of them may provide an opportunity for a little bit more depth. I know certainly from my experience sitting on the JC Trust a few years ago, we had limitations with awarding grants out because the trust deed explicitly states that you can only award grants, scholarship grants, to a maximum of 2 people. And so we had some years where we gave out more than that, and then we actually found out that we had breached the trust deed and had to kind of just keep that quiet. And that was several years ago. It came through reports to the chamber, but that was purely just because the trust deed was so restrictive. And so whilst the intent of what the trust was set out for was still really clear and it was followed, there were certainly limitations on the impact that trust could make. And that's one that I know hasn't been reviewed, possibly ever. And so certainly not all of these will require an in-depth review. I know particularly through our 17A reviews, we have had a look at some of these organisations which included trusts and trust deeds. So I don't think it's going to be a detailed review for everything, but actually I think that it's a really good idea for us to first of all review these once in a while, but also just check that actually is it still meeting its purpose? Has the purpose changed slightly, and is the trust deed restricting the impact that these trusts can be having in our community? So I think it makes a lot of sense to review these, and I certainly don't have any concerns.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, absolutely agree that the change to legislation needs to be reflected in the work that the trustees of these trusts does, and I was encouraged with Councillor Barrett at a meeting a couple of months ago to hear that Te Manawa had already undertaken that review for themselves. This does speak actually to one of the submissions that we were hearing or reading last week in the long-term plan, where one of our trustees had mentioned that your support from council would be appreciated in some of these specific areas where they struggle to resource questions about legal compliance. Wasn't particularly one of the references they made. They were talking about things like sustainability and cultural competency. But I think the principle holds true that our trust board members do appreciate the support they get from council where we can make that happen. I suppose I was a little surprised to see this come through and the scope of it to be broader than might be strictly necessary in a time when we're hearing there's a lot of pressure on staff, there's a lot of work that is necessary. And this seems to me to fall into that. Some of this is definitely necessary, but not all of it. But putting those concerns to one side and very much taking your view there, that if this is done lightly, then that could be fine. I would like to seek inclusion of a couple of amendments. So first, that the first recommendation be amended just to say that council agree to work with the trust boards to review the trust deeds. I think that's important. I think that reflects what we heard from the officer about the intention that this is a collaborative process, not something done to, but something done with. So I'm happy to move that as an amendment or to ask you as mover and the seconder to include that in the resolution that's in front of us.
Yeah, we're fine with that.
Okay, thank you. And the second amendment I'd like to seek would be to remove Wild Base Recovery Community Trust from that list. That's an independent trust. We have a council appointment to the trust, that's me, but the trust itself is nothing to do with council. So I cannot see why we would be reviewing a trust deed for a trust that serves to support one of our facilities, but is not of itself a trust that has anything to do with us. So I would move that we strike out Wild Base Recovery Community Trust and seek a seconder for that.
Can we just get some advice on that just before we go there, Councillor?
Sure.
All right. Sorry.
We're unsure exactly of where that sits at the moment. I've asked our legal counsel to look at that further in the meantime if you feel more comfortable that that's removed, and if then it comes back. We haven't actually spoken to their trust board, so it might be best we do that and then come back on that one.
Thank you to the C for those comments. I was actually in a meeting yesterday with staff talking about reviewing the trust deed, which is a piece of work that's already undergoing and being led by CR Law. So I really don't think council is also needed to be involved in that. So I'll look to move that we take out Wild Base Recovery Community Trust, either with your agreement as the mover and seconder, or I'll seek a seconder.
I'm okay. It can be brought back in if we need to.
Absolutely.
If we're a bit unsure about its status, which I'll be honest, I am as well, as we are a partner in it, but exactly who owns the trust is a little bit unsure. Okay. Are you okay with that? All right. I'll open it up for any other comments. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, did you have a...
Just for clarification for the meeting, is that word on the top, is that the amendment, or have you accepted that as part of the recommendation? I just wanted to clarify, was it an amendment? And
No,
did it have a seconder?
we've accepted it as part of the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I guess my reflection on this report is that it's very operational. And I just assumed that, legal would review these kind of things when a law change happened. So I was a bit surprised that it was coming through the chamber. The second thing is that some of these community trusts are very specific. We just administer them really as a favour to the original trustees, certainly for JCs where the original organisation is no longer operative. And it seems to me that this could well be a problem looking for a solution, because we won't, in the end, I suspect, be able to find the original trustees for some of these. I mean, the documents are very, very old. And so I'm not really sure whether this is good use of staff time, given all of the other things that need to be done at the moment. But nevertheless, I just wonder why now, and why these very minor trusts are sort of having to be reviewed when, it doesn't seem to me to be a priority. I guess, I don't have a problem with it, but it's a little bit surprising to find something very operational like this coming through the chamber when there's lots of other things that we could be considering. So I'll just leave it at that.
Good. All right, thank you, councillors. I'm not going to speak to it, we can go from there. If we could vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, we'll move now to recommendation, number 9, which is our council work schedule, pages 53, 54, 55. And I'll look to move that we receive the work schedule dated June 2021, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments or matters arising. Councillor Harper.
Question. I just want to ask a question about item number 7, which is the shareholder arrangements for Cedar. Just wondering why it's taking so long when we probably talked about this in December or January of this year. So
we haven't signed off the SOI yet. That's to be done next month. And our initial discussions with NDC were they're very happy with how it is at the moment. So I know that the officers were looking at some separate little bit of work to address this council's concerns or questioning of the shareholding arrangements. So it's second in the priority. So the first priority is SOI. We haven't got there yet. Hasn't been signed, but I'm presuming it will be in July. And this was the second bit of work. So it can either come back in August or September. The CEO's come back to us and said there's still a little bit of work to be done, and it needs to it needs to be done, and it won't come back till December.
It's going to take a year. Okay.
No, December 20. It's coming back in December this year, not next year.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Nothing else? All right, well, I'll ask you to vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. We now move to recommendations from committee meetings. We have number 10, which is presentation of our Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee recommendations from the 5th of May 2021 meeting. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Bowen, to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the Part 1 Public Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee recommendations from the 5th of May 2021 be adopted, please.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Barrett.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, I think we've got the wrong date on that.
Yes, you have.
Thank you. We have. Well spotted. Right. I'll open it up. Are there any matters arising from that? There being none, if we could vote, please. That has passed 15 votes for and 1 abstention. We now go to number 11, which is presentation of the Public Community Development Committee recommendations from their meeting of 12th of May 2021. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Johnson, to speak to that, please.
I'd like to present the recommendations from Part 1 Public Community Development Committee meeting of the 12th of May for adoption. Thank you.
And seconded by Councillor Bowen. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 15 votes for and 1 abstention. Thank you. Moving to number 12, which is our presentation of our Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 12th of May 2021 meeting. I'll ask the Chair, the Deputy Mayor, to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 12th of May be adopted.
And seconded by Councillor Hancock. Are there any matters arising? There being none, can you vote, please? That's passed, 16 votes for, none against. And then to number 13 on our order paper, which is the Public Finance and Audit Committee's recommendations from the 26th of May 2021. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to those, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee meeting be adopted, and I believe there's 2 further recommendations to follow those as well.
And seconded by Councillor Naylor. And we better put the amendments up first, please, or recommendations. So this is from Councillor Naylor and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll allow you to speak to this, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is just an additional recommendation, which is our usual practice to give, to enable minor edits of the policy, giving the Chair of Planning and Strategy and the Chair of Finance and Audit the ability to do that. My reason for suggesting this would be good to put forward is I do think there's a little bit of tidying up that still needs to be done to at least one of these policies, if not both, before submitting to the Remuneration Authority. I think whilst there was many issues that were teased out at the finance meeting, they probably didn't cover some of the minor edits. And just an example where one of the issues that was discussed was the approval process of conferences. For example, the wording in the document, it was acknowledged by the governance staff that perhaps it wasn't worded the best that it could be to convey what was intended. And I think at the moment the wording is open to interpretation and perhaps differently by different members. And I think we need to have the wording so it is clearly able to be interpreted as it was intended. So I think just for those who recollect, the discussion was particularly the wording that says first in, first served basis may mean one thing to many of us, but what was intended was more that the conferences that came up would be dealt with when they came up, rather than the first person that puts their hand up for a conference is the one that goes. So some of that just needs a little bit of tidying up, and I think it's appropriate for those 2 chairs to perhaps approve those.
All right, is any, sorry, I've got a couple of people wishing to speak to other things. I'm just unsure whether you're speaking about this. Councillor Johnson, are you speaking about this?
No, I was just going to ask that the clauses be separated,
Good.
so that 42.2.1 be taken separately.
Okay. All right. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this before we'll vote on this one first? Okay. All right, we'll vote on this, please. That's passed, 16 votes for and none against. All right, is there anything else that's coming that I'm not knowing of? Okay, all right, we're going to separate these out if that is. So we'll go perhaps with the first one, clause 41-21. We're ready to vote. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. And then we'll go to the second one, which is around the Victoria Esplanade bonsai. Councillor Johnson.
I just wanted to briefly speak to this one, Mr Mayor, which is that when this passed in committee, my recollection is it was a relatively close vote, and we also had our additional committee member voting as well. I would just like members to reconsider whether $880,000 on a bonsai house and shade house is really one of our priority spends at the moment. And so I'm not going to talk at length, but please consider it. I certainly think it's too much money to be spending right now.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Speaking to this and for this, what it's referring us to is to deliberations in the long-term plan for year 2. And I think we'll have a pretty robust debate around what's in that plan and what years they fall in. So therefore, I don't think we should be cutting it off at the knees now, but give some wider thought to that, that process. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I will be voting against this, and I'd just like to point out that this is about an additional budget. There were other options within the paper that enabled the program to be progressed, but within the parameters of our current budget, and I think that would be a preferable way to go than having yet another additional budget put in front of us. So whilst I recognise that the 10-year debate next week will be the place that we debate everything, I think in actual fact we do have an opportunity here to put the brakes on this, because there's going to be an awful lot of priorities to consider next week. If we can put the brakes on this now, there's certainly other ways that those programs can be achieved within the within the existing budget. So I'll be voting against this today.
I'll chime in as well. Look, as the mover of this recommendation at the time, I think it's not a done deal. There seems to be some thoughts that it's a done deal. It's actually being put to where it should be put, which is in the deliberations. And councillors and mayors may be swayed by debate. So I think to cut it off at now is not predetermined, but it's. I just think you should let it go its full course, and speak against it or speak strongly for it, whichever way you favour it at the appropriate time. People will weigh all that up. I agree with some of the comments. Is it a high priority? We just need to discuss that at the right time, and that right time is the deliberations of the LTP. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm supporting this recommendation today. As is already said, the recommendation is to refer this to the long-term plan process where the consideration should be had. I'm not giving any level of support to the project itself at this point in time, but I want to take a wider view and look at the 10-year plan as a whole. I feel like if we are making a decision now to put a halt to this, we're literally looking at one piece of the puzzle. We're not considering what year 2 looks like at this stage of the 10-year plan. We're not considering all of the other submissions that we have had that may implicate financial decisions if that's the basis for making this decision. So I think that actually, as we have done with many projects over the last 6 to 8 months, we have referred them to the deliberations process, that it is only fair that this project gets referred to that process to be considered. And like several people in the room, the budget associated with it at the moment has got, lots of raised eyebrows, certainly for me as well, but I'll reserve my right to provide support or not provide support through my vote next week, which I think is the appropriate time to make that decision.
And finally, the chair of the committee, Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I support what the Deputy Mayor said. Also, the bonsai house was originally in the 10-year plan, previous 10-year plan on its own. So it's now been incorporated with the shade house. So I'd just like to put it up against all the other projects so that we can prioritise with all the other projects. And we know that there's just about every single one of our projects that's come to council has been substantially increased in costs. So I think it's not just this project, there's going to be quite a few other projects within that 10-year plan that we're going to actually have to reprioritise. So I think this should be thrown within the mix.
All right, councillors, that's the comments gone. We'll now vote, please. That's passed 11 votes for and 5 against. Thank you. We'll now look to exclude the public into our part 2. So, if I can get that up, please. Okay, that the council resolves that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting: presentation of Part 2, Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from its meeting the 26th of May 2021 meeting through commercial activities. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll ask you to vote, please. It's passed 16 votes for and none against.